afternoon.
Fast and I, hello.
Thanks for dropping in today. We're looking at this newly formed climate change coalition. Alice, first of all, when did the idea of this first come about?
To be honest, I'm in the Labour Party, and we'd noticed that a lot of the things the Green Party had been saying were sensible, but we didn't want to decamp and totally all go, right, we're going to join them lot instead. But I thought, we've got areas of common ground we can work on. And then when the IPCC report came out a few weeks ago, and lots of people were like, oh, gosh, we really had better do something. And not to have a go, but the response from Mr. Boot was a little bit of a surprise. It's like the IPCC report came out, and then 2 days later the announcement came out that they were going to drill for gas. It's like, gosh, that's like really bad timing in PR terms at least. So it looks like they're really not considering it at all. So it's like, okay, well, maybe we should work together, us and a group of like-minded people. Basically, it was one of the chaps at Friends of the Earth put some emails around and says, how do you fancy cooperating on this? And everyone's like, yeah, definitely, because obviously cooperation is better, working together as a team, we get more done, hopefully.
Andrew, as far as you're concerned, that was it. Were you happy to sort of join in the coalition?
Yeah, so Pete Christian, Friends of the Earth, chairperson, formerly, and I think they're on a rotation system now, but I think the current chair, Pete Christian, he was the foundation of the idea to bring all these groups together, like Alice says, and I'm a member of Friends of the Earth, so I was invited to the group meeting anyway, but he invited me as a representative of the Green Party, myself and Andrew Bentley, the chair of the Green Party, to come along and meet with other groups like Christian Aid, Manx Labour Party were there, Friends of the Earth, Amnesty International, and really bring all these groups together that are saying the right things, bringing the important message of the effects of chronic climate change and saying, what can we do on the Isle of Man?
Were all of you in initial agreement about the avenue you wanted to go down?
So Pete, as chair of Friends of the Earth, had a conception of what that meeting was about. I was going, understanding what the subject matter would be, but not really where his vision of taking it forward was. Yeah. And I think at the meeting, we agreed 3 principles to then lobby the government on.
Yeah, I guess we all had a similar approach, but it's just like, okay, how are we going to coordinate and how are we going to work together to make sure we're effective as possible and to encourage the government to be, do you know what I mean? Yeah. We were just thinking about how do we go about it. That was it. But we all were coming from the same point of view. Yeah.
Sing from the same hymn sheet, I think, is the analogy.
We haven't organised a Christmas sing-along yet. Who knows?
It's Isle of Man Friends of the Earth, the Manx Labour Party, the Isle of Man Green Party, the Isle of Man Woodland Trust, Manx Energy Advice Centre, Christian Aid, One World Centre and Amnesty Isle of Man. Bill, as far as you're concerned, MHK for Middle, I think you're in Treasury, aren't you? Is this good for the island, this coalition?
I think it's really good. I think it's a very positive development. And I think it reflects actually increasing mainstream opinion. I think potentially in the past people would have used environmentalists as a bit on the edge, if you like, a bit out there. I think what you're seeing, certainly over the last 5 years, is public opinion has changed, and that is reflected by the large number of organisations which are coming together, because a lot of people are concerned about environmental issues, and climate change in particular is going to affect us all. So I think it's great. I think it's really positive, and I attended the event at the Legion this week, and it was fantastic. There was well over 100 people there. There was lots of young people there. There was a real enthusiasm, and I came away optimistic actually that this was going to be a positive thing.
Are you a member of any of the 8 groups that are in Climate Change Coalition?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
And I don't want to find myself in a situation where I have conflicts of interest, but I share many of their concerns, and I'm very supportive of taking action on climate change.
As far as you're concerned, Alice, which is the major thing that you would like to see driven initially?
Okay, the Isle of Man government has a lot of documents with a lot of words in, sitting on shelves, with loads of good ideas in. Like they've got a 2016 to 2020 action plan. I was having a read of it. There are loads of good ideas in, but they haven't hardly started on any of them. And that was a 5-year plan or halfway through. What the coalition want? We want intermediate targets, because they've said, oh yeah, we're going to cut it loads by 2050, and then totally ignored it. So you need to think, okay, what do we want done in 5 years? What do we want done in 10 years in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But then, so we need intermediate targets, and then we need a roadmap to get there, and we need to actually action on it. We want us to live up to our biosphere commitments, which has a lot of good ideas in, and there's plenty of good ideas there from, lots of places around the world have been sharing ideas. And there was one of the things, invest in renewables. So those are the things the coalition want.
When you look at government, there is a 5-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one for emissions which is going through until 2050 or something.
Yeah.
Is this a good idea, setting time limits? Because, as Bill said, things change so quickly nowadays. Government has got to change with it.
Yeah, but that's fine. You're just saying we're going to cut emissions by this much in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But how you do it is up to you. Do you know what I mean? It's obviously technology changes and new innovations come in, and I don't know, some, even IT. Do you know what I mean? Even information technology changes so fast that can be a really useful tool for some things. So how you do it is obviously a democratic decision and public debate and politicians and stuff like this. But obviously, if you're trying to get somewhere, you need to have a bit of a plan and a roadmap, or you're not going to get anywhere. At the minute, they're sat on the doorstep thinking about it.
But isn't this what government do well?
Well, yes, they're very good. It's like for me homework one time. I had to write a report about how do you do a fantastic transport system for the Isle of Man, and I found out that every 5 years a civil servant had written a brilliant report about how to do it really well. They'd done it, and then it sat on the shelf, and there was a whole row of them on the shelf full of good ideas, but they hadn't done them.
This is one of the problems with a general election every 5 years, isn't it? It takes 2 years to get it moving, a year to do something, and then 2 years they don't want to do anything because they might get voted off. Andrew?
I think you've just there summarised the point for party politics and continuity in statements that the parties are conceiving within the parties, within the electorate of the Isle of Man, outside of elections, but transparent and accountable to those statements, those policy documents, going, this is the long-term plan. This is not a 5-year plan which will take a term or a year to get into. It's going, we're producing it now, we're perceiving it now, and this is the next 30-year plan for Isle of Man politics. And parties are voted in on the basis of those reasoned policies and proposals for the future of the Isle of Man.
But you say, OK, we've got a 50-year plan, we've got a 5-year plan. You must be able to alter it. It's got to be a thing that you can say, oh, no, 5 years from now we want to be there. No, get there 2 years early.
But that's absolutely fine. Like, I was looking at places which have gone quite a long way, like Sweden and Denmark, for instance. They decided in 1973 for the first oil crisis, right, this is rubbish. We don't want to be beholden to OPEC in the Middle East. We're going to wean ourselves off oil. And they got it down by about half in about 20, 30 years. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but they had a long-term plan. They said, right, we're going to have a long-term plan. And government after government, they just stuck to the plan, and you just keep working away at it. And the really important thing as I see it is when you're making long-term infrastructure decisions, when you're making long-term investment decisions, when you're doing land use planning, you have to be thinking about how can we reduce fossil fuel use. Because if you make a decision like the Eastern Area Plan or whatever, are we going to build in town centres? Are we going to sprawl all over the countryside? Those decisions have effects for like 50 years. So it's trying to get that thing of thinking long term, and every time you have a long term decision, you think, how can we design this to reduce the need for fossil fuels? Because like if you have compact, attractive, walkable towns, which I keep going on about, and which Bill was trying to do in Tynwald the other day, if you have like really nice town centres people want to hang out in and people want to live in, not leery, derelict, crime-ridden cities, which we don't particularly have, but it could go that way. If you have compact, attractive, lovely towns, people aren't dependent on the cars. But if you sprawl all over the countryside, people need to use their cars. They've got no choice. So that limits your options a lot. So it's all about making it easy to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. If you put in the right infrastructure, if you do things in a sort of a human-centred way, so it's a combination of technology and things that are good for people, and bit of clever ways technology, and then maybe some financial and legal and legislative stuff. You use a combination of tools. But it's about quality of life as well. You can do it in a way that's really good for quality of life and for the economy.
But are fossil fuels the one bad thing, as far as you're concerned, that you would like to change personally?
It's just about greenhouse gases. Whatever causes greenhouse gases. I'm trying not to make a joke about cows farting. Sorry.
I think you just did. But there seems to be divided opinion about greenhouse gases. Do all the scientists agree on it? Does Trump agree on it?
Well, we could.
Scientist.
He's not a scientist. Okay, we could have a discussion now about whether the Earth is flat or not, but you may as well do that.
I think there's evidence it isn't.
Yeah, there's
But
evidence.
is
that the
there
climate
evidence about climate change and as far as the fossil fuels greenhouse gases
Yeah, it's
are concerned?
overwhelming. It's absolutely
For good
nailed.
or bad?
What do you mean?
Well, are greenhouse gases getting worse and worse and worse, or are they sort of holding still as far as the environment's concerned?
If you look at the graphs, it's sort of going through the roof, really. The greenhouse gases yes, if you look at the science, we need to make some... How can I explain this?
Well, the report that came out this week
Yeah.
showed that levels have not been reached in the last 3.5 million years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trite law now. I don't know why
Yeah,
we're wasting our time talking about
it's
this.
a waste of time talking about the science because it's absolutely solid. Do you know what I mean?
With respect, I don't think it is a waste of time
No,
talking about it because you've got to get your message over to Joe Public. And Joe Public say, I don't know how this is going to affect me. I rather like the warm winters.
Well, it's not so much warm winters. I mean, it's more climate chaos, isn't it? I mean, it's like we've had a drought this year. You had a cold snap last winter. It's more unpredictable weather. It's like the report that just came out from the IPCC. It says we have to put a heck of a lot of work in to stabilise the climate at 1.5 degrees C at above current levels. Now, that is going to cause a lot. That's not going to be an easy situation to live with. That's going to mean sea defences, more pest farms because of drought. It's going to mean more refugees. Do you know what I mean? And that's the best case scenario. Do you know what I mean? Is a lot of trouble coming our way. What we're trying to do is avoid it getting a lot worse than that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So we owe it. We can argue from here until we're up to our ears in water. But looking at Andrew as the younger generation, they're not going to be happy about that. Do you know what I mean? I think we owe it on the balance of probabilities, right? We owe it to people who are like anybody younger than 40 or 50 to at least have a go. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think we've messed up then?
Well, you're a bit older than me. I'm going to blame it on your generation, not mine.
And I'll blame it on Bill's.
I think there's consensus. I think the
Yeah.
IPCC report is accepted by governments around the world that climate change is a major issue. And I think it's perhaps wrong to say that this is just an issue for young people. It's an issue for everybody. And
Yeah, but it is something we're handing on to the young people, isn't it, to be very truthful?
It's something that really engages with the younger generation. Certainly, I've picked that up, and it's an important issue for them. But it's not exclusive; it affects us all. But what? So I think if we're all accepting that it's a genuine issue, I think there is absolute consensus that is. I think what is probably a more interesting debate is how we move forward and how we tackle this. And certainly, I have been pleased that the Climate Change Coalition has energised the debate, and I was also pleased to hear Geoffrey Boots' response this week, which was using different rhetoric than I heard before, and it was more action centred. I think a lot of what Alice was saying was actually we've had enough talk, enough reports, we want to see action. So I was really pleased with that, and I almost felt that was a very important moment. So I think. Perhaps I'm crossing all my fingers, Bob, and my toes, but I'm certainly heartened by that, and I know that discussions are now happening, real discussions with the different departments to see how we take that view now that we must take bold action, which is what Geoffrey was articulating, into what does that relate to in terms of things that people can see on the ground, things that are actually happening. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I think he gave a commitment for early next year to do that. So
Yeah, that's a pretty fast turnaround, really.
yeah, and I was also heartened that the Minister of Environment was keen to meet with the Climate Change Coalition. I thought that was constructive. So as I say, I'm really hoping that the Climate Change Coalition can bring things to the party, and also that they will be listened to, and together we can actually make a difference in this. But I think it's important that people see physical things happening rather than another report.
I guess it's that thing. It's like everybody's got a to-do list, and you got urgent and important, and basically climate change is on the very important.
Yeah.
But say for the last 10 years, we've had like economic issues, and then there's been Brexit, and you can see why politicians have been sort of preoccupied with that. because
There's plenty of challenges. We're
there's
juggling
plenty of
lots of
challenges.
challenges.
Yeah, you've plenty of challenges, but
as
this is
I
an
say,
important one.
I think what I'm seeing is that this is becoming mainstream public opinion.
Yeah, and that's
So
what the coalition is
that's-
for, is just to remind you lot, basically.
Andrew, as far as this meeting that you had recently, a dumb question, but as far as you were concerned, how many of the people in the audience were sort of, I don't know, under 30? Roughly a percentage.
Well, I would say, as a first comment, I mean, been involved with Friends of the Earth, Green Party for a long time, so you see the usual faces talking about the same things, which are all positive. Now, what was good about this meeting was there were so many people who I didn't recognise, and young people as well, come in, seeing it as an opportunity. But lots of people are recognising climate change as this huge issue, but they're like, what do we do? What can we do? We're not sure how we can play a part in this change that our society, the global society, has to be a part of. And so it was great to see a lot of young people asking important questions and going, show us what to do, help us. And I think the people who made presentations on the stage talked about that.
Yeah,
What was the one thing that, as far as you were concerned, came out of that meeting? Okay, you've now got a climate change coalition, but what were the ideas that came out of the meeting that you think, yeah, we can go with that?
Well, one member who was there made a really good, valuable point of talking about Tynwald's commitment to sustainability and an agreed to commitment to sustainability, and how Treasury could hold the purse strings on enforcing that commitment in any government decision. Everything financial has to come through Treasury, and if Treasury had to rubber stamp everything, going, this doesn't meet our sustainable requirements, this doesn't meet our commitments to reduce emissions, whether that's the 2050 target, we're still committed to reducing emissions. So it's Treasury who could go, well, we're going to speed this up by rubber stamping projects, and if they don't meet the requirements that are demanded by civil society, then they shouldn't pass through Treasury.
As far as Treasury is concerned, Bill, I should imagine you would agree with that, but funds are limited.
I from a Treasury perspective, I think we work in partnership with across government. So I don't see this as one department's responsibility. I see this as an absolute shared responsibility across government. And at the end of the day, this is a Tynwald commitment. So it's a commitment that we should all be looking to meet our obligations on sustainability. I also think that from a financial perspective, we talk about purse strings. I do not see being more sustainable and being more environmentally friendly as being incompatible with financial responsibility.
Yeah.
I think in many situations actually they work together, and you can see that in other countries where sensible changes have been made, and actually in the longer term they've had a positive benefit for the exchequer. So I don't see in any way Treasury being in conflict on this. I think that there are a number of ways where our departments can work together for the greater good.
Yeah,
and do you think that will be the population's view? Oh, good on them. They supported coalition. People sort of vote with their pockets, don't they?
Well, as I say, I don't necessarily see being more sustainable as affecting people in their pockets. If we can get more people to walk, to use their bicycle, actually it saves them money, because they're not having to pay for fuel, they're not having to pay parking charges. If we have houses which are constructed so that they don't use as much fuel, well, that's great news for the environment. It's also great news for the consumer. So I think there's perhaps a bit of a misunderstanding that actually green equals much more expensive. In a number of situations it doesn't. So
yeah, it's sometimes presented as a trade-off, like, oh, if you have one you can't have the other, but there's a lot of win-wins. I mean, there's a lot of things where it's like you say, if you've got a house that doesn't need heating because it's so efficient, it's like everyone's going to be happy with that, really.
But if the MEA, won't prices go up if everybody uses less and less electricity?
So that's a very interesting conundrum, Bob. And so I think a number of people would say we're a wee bit behind in terms of electric cars. So if you go across, you see lots more electric cars, a lot more electric charging points, and the consumption of electricity here is actually dropping as people become more efficient in their use. They've got better insulation or double glazing, more. So you're seeing that happen naturally. This is an opportunity actually for the MEA to sell more electricity and move us to hopefully lower emissions as a result. So as I say, these are quite complex, multifaceted discussions.
I guess that's why you need like a long-term approach, because you go, okay, if in 30 years we want houses to be want most houses to be like super efficient, and most people, probably be driving electric cars in 30 years. How do we get from here to there? And that's where you've got to figure out the details and the nuts and bolts, and what's the MEA going to do for business plan and stuff like that.
And I think that will come through as we head into next year with proposals for how we can improve on those things. And as I say, it's very important though that proposals turn into actual things on the ground that people can see, and they can see that.
The question I asked Andrew, Alice asked you now, what was the one positive that came out of the meeting where you formed the coalition? The forming of the coalition was a big thing. But one other thing that somebody mentioned that sort of far as you were concerned, we ought to really do something about that.
To be honest, there was like a big stack of ideas that we harvested a big stack of ideas off people, and my mind's gone blank. There was somebody came up who just said she's organised a climate conference in Durham and she'd like to do one here. So that was good. There was a lot of really. The one thing I thought was great was so many people turned up I didn't know, and so many young people, and so many people were dead enthusiastic and having a good, just having a nice relaxed time, but going, we should definitely do something on this. And a lot of good ideas. We've signed up over 80 people to be on the mailing list, and quite a lot of them want to be like part of the support team, and people going, I can do research and I can talk really well, or people do, lots of different skills who want to get involved. That was the thing that I thought was great. So we're just consolidating that just now.